Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Sunday edition called Survive and Thrive with Dennae. Your host, Dennae Handford, will dive deep into chapter-by-chapter discussions on specifically selected books to help you make better decisions as an entrepreneur. Visit toughdecisions.net to sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HandfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HandfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HandfordCapital.com.
Thank you for joining me today, this Sunday edition of the Tough Decisions podcast, the very first Sunday of 2019. And I hope that you've had a good start to your new year. And I hope that you have taken some time to write down some goals and have big plans for 2019. I'm looking forward to 2019 for myself and for our family, and can't wait to see what comes of the work that we're doing and the new goals and aspirations that we have. You know, I read something recently about New Year's resolutions, and we all know the joke about New Year's resolutions that, you know, something like 80% of people's New Year's resolutions either never come about at all, or by the third or fourth week of January, you know, whatever they had started in the first or second week no longer exists. Maybe they did it for a week or two. And actually, my sister and I used to have a joke about going to the gym because we were both very avid gym goers all year round. And she still is. I work out at home a lot now because of our family, but she still goes to the gym regularly. We used to go together. And while we were in college, we used to have this joke. We would go in the summer at the same times, or we would pass each other going in and out because we had different jobs. And in January, the gym is always crowded. And we used to laugh that you can literally see it happen because you go in January, wherever you choose to work out, and there's so many people that you can't use the equipment that you normally use. You know, like if you normally use a treadmill, you can't find a treadmill. And it's like the gym needs to purchase more equipment, you know, or you use the elliptical machine or the stair stepper or the weights, and everything's all taken up. But you can see it happen, you know, by the middle of January, by the end of January, and then into February, you have the same people that were there in November and December. And so all of that to say that has nothing to do with my podcast today, except that I wanted to share with you before we get started here that I saw, I think it was on Facebook, and I really loved the concept that this quote or this sentence gave about New Year's resolutions. And it was, instead of making a New Year's resolution that we all know is likely going to fade away by, you know, the end of January, why not change or develop a new rule of life that's going to get you to where you want to go? So instead of looking at it as a temporary, okay, I'm going to diet or lose weight or, you know, whatever it is, I'm going to live on a tight budget until I reach a certain point. And a lot of times what we find is really that's the way we should be living all the time, or that would be the healthier way to live all the time. And so instead of looking at it as a New Year's resolution to get you to a certain point at which you can go back and do the same things you've always done, which got you into the bad spot to start with, why not look at it as creating or developing a new rule of life, or in other words, a new way of living? And I think that puts us in a much better position to be successful because it's not looked at as something temporary to help us reach a goal, but it's looked at as something that we really need to improve about ourselves, whether it's, you know, lack of discipline. And that's, to me, that's typically what it is. It's a lack of discipline in a certain area that we need to exercise some discipline in. And so anyway, I wanted to share that before we get started because I thought it was a good way of looking at New Year's resolutions. I really don't like New Year's resolutions. I do like the fresh start of a new year, I do like the activity of setting goals, but you can set goals at any time of the year. And really, we should all constantly be setting new goals and evaluating where we are and setting a new place or a new goal for ourselves to reach. And so I think that making or creating a new rule of life or a new way of living is a much more profitable exercise than just writing down a list of New Year's resolutions. So that was all free of charge. Let's jump now to the next public speaking secret in the list that we've been discussing. If you'll remember, we were working our way through the most important topics of a book called Talk Like TED, written by Carmine Gallo, The 9 Public Speaking Secrets of the World's Top Minds. And just to refresh your memory, Gallo has dissected and listened to hundreds, maybe thousands of TED Talks, and he has put together his own list of what he identifies as the 9 secrets that make these TED Talks so powerful. And we are on number 5 today, and he sort of divided them into 3 groups. The first one was that TED Talks are emotional. And within that, he talked about having a passion for your topic. He talked about storytelling as a means of connecting with your audience and helping them to feel the same emotions about your topic that you feel. And he also talked about making it conversational rather than a formal public speaking engagement like we would typically think, one person speaking to thousands. If you can make it conversational, then it allows you to connect with your audience better. And then he said that these TED Talks, they are novel. They present something new. And last week, we looked at the first aspect of that in just understanding how to present a topic with some novelty, whether it's new information or a new perspective on old information. And I also went through some headlines, and we talked about the Twitter-worthy headline and how important it is that you be able to summarize your main point in 140 characters or less. Now, the 140 is somewhat arbitrary, but the point is that you be able to succinctly summarize your main idea. And if you can't do that, then more exercise and more discipline is needed regarding your topic. Because if you can't do that, then it's going to be really hard for you to get that main idea across to your audience. Now that brings us to number 5, which Gallo is also within this idea of novelty. But Gallo says that these most powerful TED Talk presentations all deliver jaw-dropping moments. So that's number 5, deliver jaw-dropping moments. And just by way of introduction and illustration, let me share with you the illustration that Gallo uses, which is the TED Talk given by Bill Gates back in the early 2000s, where he literally released mosquitoes into the audience. Now you can imagine what kind of response he might have gotten. Now I have not personally seen or listened to that particular TED Talk, but that is definitely a creative way of grabbing your audience's attention. Now, Gates was making a point about malaria and the prevalence of malaria in poor countries and different ways of preventing or treating malaria in these countries. But he wanted to make a point to his audience, and he needed their attention. And we might say that that was even a fairly, I don't want to say common topic, but maybe a topic that people would go, yeah, I already heard that. Or yeah, we've talked about poverty and how it's affected the population with disease and so on. So he might have been feeling somewhat like his audience was going to tune him out, but I guarantee you when he released those mosquitoes into the audience, they were no longer tuning him out. Now, here in South Carolina, we like to joke and say that the mosquito is our state bird. I literally have never seen mosquitoes so big as we have here in South Carolina, and I grew up in Alabama, which is a fairly, warm weather, somewhat tropical climate. We have some cold weather in the winter. We have cold snaps, but I thought moving to South Carolina that I'd be very well prepared because I grew up in Alabama. Let me tell you, the mosquitoes here are incredibly large, and I hate them. We have our yard treated for them every year because we hate them so much. So I can only imagine the response when you release mosquitoes into an audience of thousands of people. He wanted their attention, and he got it. because he was creative. Now, you don't have to release mosquitoes in order to create this moment. And that's what I don't want to be lost on us. You might think, well, my presentation is not about bugs. I can't turn bugs loose or spiders loose in the audience, or I can't really think of a great way to get my audience's attention. The point is, there are several different ways, multiple ways of doing that. And that's what I hope to share with you is some tools that you can use when you're presenting, whatever you're presenting about. The jaw-dropping moment is when the presenter delivers a shocking, impressive, or surprising moment that is so moving and memorable, it grabs the listener's attention and is remembered long after the presentation is over. And that's what you're going for. Now, in just a moment, we're going to get into a little bit of the neuro research that we've been talking about in each one of these segments and talk about why that is so necessary to get people to remember your presentation. But for now, understand that there are multiple ways of doing this. And I'm going to give you 5 ways towards the end of our podcast today that you can use to get that jaw-dropping moment or to create that memorable moment that you need in order to get your audience to remember. Sometimes you need to surprise the audience. Sometimes you can use a story, a personal story. Sometimes you can use a shocking statistic or fact. But whatever it is, you have to find a way to create a moment where the audience goes, wow. Now, there's another term for this. It's called an emotionally charged event. An emotionally charged event works because the human brain, as Gallo says, is wired for it. And that's basically the truth with each one of these techniques that we're talking about. We have to speak to people. And when we're speaking to people, we have to understand how their brain works and what they're thinking and how they think in order to be able to get our point across and get them to remember what we're saying, especially in this age where information is so prevalent and we're bombarded with information and advertising all the time, literally all day long. If you want to be remembered, you have to be memorable. Now, I want to quote here from a scientist named John Medina, and I want to quote because I think that his explanation is very succinct and it's very helpful in a way to think about it. So let me read here a section from Gallo's book. Medina says it all has to do with the amygdala, which is located in the prefrontal cortex. Now, just as a way of connecting things, if you'll remember, the prefrontal cortex is where we perform a lot of the non-cognitive traits, you remember that term, that make us successful, but it's also the home of the amygdala. And the amygdala is basically where your brain stores the memories that you have. And so the amygdala then is chock full of the neurotransmitter dopamine, and it uses dopamine the way an office assistant uses Post-it notes. I love that analogy. When the brain detects an emotionally charged event, the amygdala releases dopamine into the system. Because dopamine greatly aids memory and information processing, you could say the Post-it note reads, "Remember this." Getting the brain to put a chemical Post-it note on a given piece of information means the information is going to be more robustly processed. So essentially then, when you create that emotionally charged event, it's a way of flagging or tagging the information associated with that event, and the brain can more easily recall it. Very simple to illustrate this. I would say that probably everyone listening to me would remember exactly where you were when you found out about the tragedy that occurred on 9/11/2001. I know I do. I was in college. I was sitting in a class. So we were getting ready to start our 9 o'clock class, and I heard these kids behind me talking about New York and some airplanes and a crash and whatnot, and I didn't know what they were talking about because I had an 8 o'clock class that met from 8 to 8:50, and so I had gone straight from that to my next class, and I was sitting there, and then when we started the 9 o'clock class, my professor, made an announcement about, such and such had happened, and we weren't quite sure what was going on, and, basically tried to inform everybody as best he could at that point. But I remember exactly what I was doing. In fact, I remember where I was sitting in the classroom. I don't think I could point you to the exact row, but I know about where I was sitting in that classroom. And that's because 9/11 was such an emotionally charged event. It was such a memorable event for our country because so many people were involved. The ramifications and the fallout of that event were enormous. And so it's very simple to remember those details that otherwise, I couldn't tell you where I sat in any other college class. I'm sure I couldn't. But that class, that semester, I know exactly where I was sitting. And so that's what we're talking about. Same thing is true with other events. When the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the Challenger explosion in the 1980s. I was very, very young, so I don't remember that. But I know many of you probably remember exactly where you were when you saw that or heard that. And so that's what we're talking about. Now, obviously, we don't necessarily want to create a tragedy, but it can be as simple as sharing a story about a tragedy or sharing a story about another emotionally charged event that stirs the emotion of the audience can be just as effective. Now, the neuroscientific research that has occurred has shown us that we remember these things because of those emotionally charged events. We remember them better, but part of the reason why we remember them better is that we actually experience them in a more vivid way. And so once you're able to get the attention and get that emotion going in the audience, they actually experience the information around that more vividly, which then allows them to recall more vividly. So then the question is, what tools do we have that will allow us to create this emotionally charged event in which we can gain the attention of the audience? And remember, when we say emotionally charged event, basically we are going for the wow response, right? When the audience is either verbally or in their head going, wow, that's the response we want. That's when we can proceed and we can know that the information that we're sharing is going to be remembered longer than some neutral moment in which we shared that information. So the tools we have are several. Number one, you can use props and demos. And Gallo gave a couple of examples of this. I'll just share one here. He told the story of Mark Shaw, who created Ultra Everdry, an invention with the feature that it repels liquids and stays dry. And at the TED conference in 2013, he demonstrated his technology by dumping a bucket of red paint, and he threw it on a whiteboard. The paint dripped down and off the board, but letters showed up there that spelled TED because those were the areas that were not coated in the Ultra Everdry or his liquid repelling technology. So that was just a simple demonstration, but I'm sure everyone in the audience was very shocked at the result of his demonstration. And then he was able to proceed from there and explain his technology and the applications of it. But it would have been hard to understand exactly how powerful that technology was without illustrating it. The second thing you can use is unexpected or shocking statistics. And I think the most important point about this is what Gallo says regarding the statistics is that you should always put your statistics in context. You have to make them meaningful, memorable by placing them in a context for your audience. You can't just share the statistics. For example, here, John Ronson, a TED speaker, said that 1 in 100 regular people is a psychopath. So if there's 1,500 people in this room, 15 of you are psychopaths. So he didn't just share the 1 in 100 regular people. He put that into context for the audience so that they could apply it and have a better idea of what it actually meant for them. The third thing that we can use is pictures, images, and videos. And, we have these wonderful technologies now of PowerPoint and Prezi and other softwares. But again, Gallo mentions that it's so important that you not start with that you start with the most important ideas of your presentation and get those nice and crystallized and very specific. And then you can use the pictures and the images and videos that best support your points with a software. But pictures, images, and videos are one way to create these emotionally charged events. The fourth one and the fifth one are ones that we've kind of already mentioned, so I won't spend too long there, but memorable headlines. If you'll remember last week, the Twitter-worthy headline and how important that could be. The soundbite, Gallo says, is so important that TED actually has a site and Twitter handle dedicated to the best quotes from his speakers. And Gallo makes the point that these sound bites are really important now because of the way information is shared. You know, we share so much through Twitter and through a Facebook feed that if you can create a sound bite or a quote worthy of a sound bite, then it can be memorable and it can be shared over and over and over, which makes it more memorable and because of its repetition. It's even more important, he says, that you feed these platforms with catchy, repeatable quotes. And so going for a soundbite, not necessarily saying something, just to create a stir, but these sentences and these quotes that succinctly summarize the most powerful points are really important. And then the last one, personal stories. Again, we spent a whole episode talking about how storytelling can really get the audience's attention. But personal stories, don't forget, are a tool that you have that will allow you to create an emotionally charged event if used properly. So how do you get your audience's attention? You deliver jaw-dropping moments. And we do this in order to create an emotionally charged event so that the brain remembers the information shared around that event. It remembers it longer and it remembers it better. And that's really what we're going for, because if you make a very powerful point but no one can remember it and no one can apply it, then it really wasn't that successful at all. You want them to be able to remember and recall the most important facts and applications. In order to do that, we use these emotionally charged events. So join me next week. We'll continue our talk on the 9 secrets of the world's top minds, talk like TED. Next week, we're going to talk about the role of humor in creating some novelty and allowing us to be able to better communicate our thoughts and ideas.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.